Magnolia Park have just released their latest deluxe album Nights After Vamp, but they didn't always have their nu metal sound which has become synonymous with the band. I first heard of this band back in their first album, at which point they were the next big pop punk band, but boy have times changed. Today, we'll dive into the story of Magnolia Park, the basic lore behind Nocturne Nexus, and their journey from having to ditch the struggling genre of pop punk to join the new wave of nu metal that's thriving in 2026. Welcome to the Alternative Breakdown. Magnolia Park have had quite the journey to get to where they are today, but to know where it all began, we need to dive into. Magnolia Park were formed in 2018 out of Orlando, Florida. They began as a duo of childhood friends, Tristan Torres, who is the rhythm guitarist, and Freddie Criales on lead guitar. The band found their voice shortly after, as Joshua Roberts joined the band as their vocalist. Now there was originally a drummer called Scott Ellis, but he only hung around for a year before disappearing into the abyss. Even in the age of the internet, I couldn't really find anything about him, which is odd. Once Scott departed though, the core of the band that we know today formed. You had Joe Horsham joining the band to pick up the sticks, and Jared Kay giving us that smooth bass line. 6 months on from those additions, and Vincent Ernst joined the band to pick up the keyboard and some programming in the background. Scott Ellis wasn't the only person to leave the band though, as in 2023, Jared Kay left the band citing creative differences. He did go on to have a solo project called Century, with one track in particular catching my eye, Nothing Left to Take. In an interview with Adobe Radio, Kay described the track as a kind-hearted person trying to break free from a narcissist. Was this a direct shot at the band? We'll never know, since there was nobody ever named, but the timing of things was loud to say the least. Unfortunately for him, that project never really took off, and it's been radio silence from him ever since. As for the bass duties, it was a rather simple transition, as Vincent Ernst just picked up the vacant spot. The name Magnolia Park has a very simple yet funny meaning behind it, as it's the location that lead guitarist Freddie Criales broke his leg. I know what you're thinking, I'm sick in the head for finding it funny that he broke his leg, but it's how he did it that I find funny. He did it while riding his Razor scooter. Now if you grew up similarly to me, then you will be all too familiar with this fall, especially if it ever had an encounter with your shin, but breaking your leg on one must have been some fall. If you're enjoying this video so far, it would mean the world if you could subscribe to the channel. We just smashed our goal of 1000 subscribers, but any support keeps these breakdowns coming your way weekly. Let's go ahead and earn that by diving into the music. Now that we know how Magnolia Park came to be, it's time to turn to the music, and for that, we need to dive into. As of the time of recording, Magnolia Park have released 5 EPs, 2 mixtapes, 2 albums and 2 deluxe albums, which is quite the catalogue for a 6-year-old band, and I can't lie, it's a bit all over the place. The band's journey began with a few singles between 2018 and 2019 before they dropped their first EP on the 25th of January 2020, which was simply a collection of all of these singles. The biggest hit off this 4-track EP would be October, and at this stage, the band was still trying to find their sound. For all the world slowed to a halt in 2020, this only halted touring plans for Magnolia Park, as they just continued churning out single after single for the rest of 2020. 2 singles really stood out here, the first of which was Sick of It All, which quickly became their most successful track yet. The second track is the first time the band gained some real credibility in the scene, as they got a feature from Kellen Quinn of Sleeping with Sirens on their track Love Me. Not bad for a band with only 1 EP released, but that was set to change, as March 2021 rolled around and we got Magnolia Park's sophomore EP, Dream Eater. This EP contained 6 tracks. 3 of these were new tracks, 2 were previously released singles, and The Partridge in the Pear Tree was a remix of their single Sunburst with a feature from Glimmers. Fast forward to September 2021, and Magnolia Park were finally set to get their first record deal. While on tour opening for Lil Lotus, the band were approached by Epitaph Records, and the rest is history. This set the band up perfectly to crack on with their debut album, and we didn't need to wait long for it at all. As you'll probably have guessed by now, in between there was another batch of singles getting drip fed one by one until we hit October 2021, and Magnolia Park dropped their debut album length release, but it wasn't actually an album, given the title Halloween Mixtape. It was so close to being the perfect release, but unfortunately Halloween fell on the Saturday, so they had to settle for the 29th as the release date. The tracks on this mixtape are where things start to get a little bit complicated. As is typical, there was 3 tracks on the album which were singles beforehand, but there was also Sick of It All and Back on My Bullshit off of Dream Eater. Just to make it weirder, they released more of the tracks as singles afterwards. I've looked into a lot of bands' discographies, but this is quite possibly the weirdest album that's not an album I've ever encountered. Some key tracks off this album that we've not spoken about yet would have to be the number 2 and 3 in terms of Spotify streams in their true pop punk era. These were Liar and 10 for 10. But there is one final track I want to mention, and weirdly, it's the least streamed off of this album. What caught my eye was simply the track's name, Sentry. Is that ringing a bell for anybody? Brownie points for you if you remembered, but that would go on to be Jared Kay's solo project name in 2023. Nothing crazy to confirm here, but a neat little Easter egg that I found. Overall, this was actually a pretty strong debut full-length release. I hate calling it a mixtape, I just can't place why. It's also where they really found their footing with that original pop-punk sound, and over their next EP and album they would seriously cement this. Thankfully, that's the hardest part of their discography to explain out of the way, but it's still not plain sailing quite yet. Next up was their third EP, which came after 3 singles, 2 of which were featured on it. These singles were Tokyo featuring Crystal Bowman of Bad Sons, then Feel Something featuring Derek Sanders of Mayday Parade. This led into the release of Heart Eater on the 20th of June 2022. And I'm not sure if you've noticed yet, there's a bit of a theme going on with the last 2 EP names. We'll revisit that shortly though. For now, it's time to get into their real debut album, which came later in 2022. After a string of 5 singles post Heart Eater, it was time for the world to meet Baku's Revenge, which is where the band really fine-tuned that pure pop-punk sound. Released on the 4th of October, Baku's Revenge featured massive tracks like Misfits with Taylor Acorn and Addison Rae. They would also go on to release a deluxe version of this album in 2023, including 3 new tracks and the addition of the societal call-out that is Don't Be Racist. I personally love Tristan's description of this track, as he simply explains, Tristan, Freddie and Josh wrote this because we were mad at all the racist comments we would get for just existing. The biggest thing about this album for me was seeing the band starting to explore some slightly heavier vocals, but they were still firmly in that pop-punk scene for now. Now that we've left the Baku's Revenge era of the band, it's time for an interesting release, which is a double EP. We're hungry once again as we are treated to both Moon Eater and Soul Eater on August 18th, 2023. For all it was a double EP launch, there were actually 2 very different EPs, and this almost feels like the transition period for the band. Soul Eater continued with the more upbeat, alt-pop, pop-punk style that becomes synonymous with the band, but it's Moon Eater where things get interesting. This is where they really commit to something a little heavier, as this EP draws a lot of inspiration from metalcore with some breakdowns and more distorted guitars. It's clear Magnolia Park were feeling the heavier stuff a bit, and the fans were feeling it too. Moon Eater is comfortably the more streamed of these 2 EPs, with Do or Die off it having more streams than everything off of Soul Eater combined, and then tripled. This showed some demand, but it wasn't confirmed yet. That was still to come. As Magnolia Park rounded off their tour for Baku's Revenge, they dropped their second mixtape, Halloween Mixtape 2. I know I personally don't love calling them mixtapes, but the band does have a sound reasoning behind it. Freddie explained that they call it a mixtape since they view it as more of a test, and they don't feel the need to have it as cohesive as an album would be. Experiment they did as they leaned more into the heavier side of things now, adopting more of a nu metal sound. There are plenty of heavier metal instrumentals, but they're mixed with rap style elements and a lot of electronics blending it all together. The standouts on this mixtape has to be the anthemic Animals and Manic. After this mixtape released on October 27th, they closed out 2023 by making their way to Australia for the first time to play Good Things Festival. This is where everything changed for the band. Sure, their older pop punk tracks were getting a good reception, but the reaction to their heavier tracks in Australia inspired them to take the risk and commit heavier. Just before they do this though, they get to take part in a really fun project to give their pop punk roots a send off. Disney reached out and asked the band to cover Eye to Eye from the 1995 film A Goofy Movie. This was all a part of A Whole New Sound, which features a ton of alternative bands from old school bands like Yellowcard and Newfound Glory to newer acts like Lolo and Magnolia Park themselves. A string of singles either side of this led us into their latest album, Vamp, which was released on April 11th, 2025. This album included their breakout single for their new sound, Shallow, as well as other heavy hitters like Worship and Cult. This one is a little different in its own way though, as it's actually a concept album. The story follows a half-human, half-cyborg warrior named Aurora X1, who is the leader of a rebel group called the Shadowbreakers. This entire story takes place in a realm called Nocturne Nexus, as the Shadowbreakers fight to free their world from a shadow cult. The plot twist here is that the cult's leader, Obsidian, is actually Aurora's biological father. If you know me and this channel, then you will know I love me some lore. So let me know in the comment section down below if you want me to cover it in more detail in a separate video. Finally, we fast forward some more to Friday, just 2 days ago, as the band have released a deluxe version of Vamp. But this is no normal release. I'm obviously recording this before it releases, but it's going to be a direct continuation of the story, which is much needed given we've been left on a bit of a cliffhanger on the original album. So we have their origins and the music, but that still doesn't tell the full story. For that, we need to dive into. First of all, it's hard not to address the blow-up sized elephant in the room. Magnolia Park were in amongst a group of bands who really weaponised TikTok in their favour to promote their music. This began in lockdown when the band was in their pop-punk days. Back then, one particular part of 10 for 10 started to dominate the alternative TikTok scene, due to the relatability and some really tough times. This is when I first became aware of the band, but I wasn't really sold on their pop-punk stuff despite loving the genre. Where they really grabbed my attention with social media was their biggest single off of Vamp, Shallow. This track is still everywhere on alternative TikTok to this day, and I personally feel like the band really found their true sound with this style of music. They've been posting consistently since lockdown and have managed to build a dedicated fanbase on there of 1.3 million followers, which is no mean feat at all. Having that many eyes on you does come with some problems though. It doesn't take Albert Einstein to figure out that the alternative scene has been dominated by white guys. Unfortunately for Magnolia Park, this has led to some blatant racism as a way of criticising the band, as they consistently get comments like black people don't make punk music, or just being told that they're a rap group. The band didn't just ignore it though, instead they channeled every last word of it into their music. Don't Be Racist was a massive track for the band, as they not only called out every single person who spoke against them for their race, but that track and this band could be the reason that young black kids get into the scene, or even better, pick up a guitar and play in a band. The alternative scene truly is for everybody, and Magnolia Park standing their ground and getting heavier and heavier in defiance proves that racism never wins. Now, they're louder than ever and an uncompromising force in the new wave of nu metal. This takes us perfectly into their sound one final time. Magnolia Park's transition from pop punk to nu metal may have been a little gradual to begin with, but the statement of intent that came with Vamp is nothing short of explosive. They traded the sunshine and rainbows of Addison Rae for the chunky guitars of Shadow Talk and Cult. They're blending a lot of different styles, like the R&B vocal runs that Josh is incredible at, with breakdowns that could be straight off of Sempiternal. The result is a fusion we all know and love as nu metal, and I can't help but feel that this is exactly where they were meant to be. Influences from rock, metal, electronic music and hip hop all combining just plays into Magnolia Park's strengths perfectly. Now that all the evidence has been provided, it's time for... Magnolia Park have fully arrived and they are not going anywhere. They have found the sound that matches their ambition and they're not afraid to branch out and do whatever feels right for them either. Have they ditched the struggling genre of pop punk? It would appear so. However, they've become a foundational part of this new wave of nu metal in the process, and it just feels right. What's next for the band? I'd love to see them continue to explore the world of Nocturne Nexus in a follow-up album, and with the rate these guys churn music out at, it wouldn't surprise me if we got that later this year. I'm personally hoping to catch them at Download Festival this year unless they get a horrific clash. And if you get a chance to catch them at their upcoming Nights After Vamp tour or at a festival in the summer, then I would highly recommend giving them a go live. That is all for Magnolia Park, but don't run away just yet. If you've enjoyed this video, then it would mean the world if you could subscribe to the channel. And while you're down there, why not leave a like? If you enjoyed this video, then you will love my video on South Arcade, another band that blew up on TikTok and have continued killing the game. That's on screen now. Thank you so much for watching, and until the next time, goodbye.